Yeah.
Everybody get coffee. Does everybody get coffee and cookies? Or cookie? Just a couple of announcements. One is, remember that we're having an inaugural occasion for the Institute of the Study of Muslim Societies and Civilizations next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, on November 2nd, in the library in Mugar on the first floor. And refreshments and so on, and all of you are invited. Please come. We'll be taking, you know, we'll check on you as you come in, make sure everybody's there. Faculty, other guests will be there, and Richard Fry, who was a long-time Aga Khan professor of Iranian studies at Harvard, will be there. We have his library now in the Mugar Special Collections, and we're honoring him. And I don't know, some of you may know his work, but it'll be very nice to see him. He is Methuselah now, but he's always young, and I think it'll be a great treat to see him. Also, at the end of this talk, there will be questions. Penetrating, very difficult questions, and we'll continue into the night with those. Well, we want to have this series. We're inaugurating it this afternoon, but we'll have it in the spring also. So those of you who are working on your dissertations or have some idea of the dissertation that you'd like to present, we will ask you if you'd be willing to give a talk in the spring. So please think about that, because I think this is very important. Share your work with all of us. And so this afternoon we have Aaron Spevack talking on this subject, al-Bajuri, and he is what I call you old-fashioned. That is to say, he's a real kind of traditional Orientalist of a certain kind, almost a European kind of scholar who's looking at text, editing, translating text, really studying the roots of law, the roots of orthodoxy, and so on. So we're getting a sense of an Islamologue in a French tradition, really, and we really appreciate your doing this. And I should say also that Aaron is a musician, and I had thought at first that he might bring his musical group in to entertain us, but that'll be on another occasion, I think. So we'll just listen to your scholarship tonight. So have you come up.
Okay, thanks Professor Mason for the introduction. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up. And I'd like to thank Uni and everybody there that's been supporting me throughout my past few years here. Also, thanks to Mike and the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilization, Societies and Civilizations for organizing this. So I've been asked, as you know, to present the research that I've been conducting for my dissertation, as well as provide some background on my music and its role in bringing me to Islamic studies. This is the only bit of comic relief we're going to get right here. So just briefly, so it may seem strange that I'm linking my jazz performance and teaching career to the highly esoteric and complex legal and theological topics that I'm currently researching, but there is in fact a connection. My college education began at the New England Conservatory of Music, where in addition to studying jazz guitar, I also pursued my interest in world music, namely Turkish Sufi and classical music, Balinese gamelan music, just a little bit of that, and North and South Indian classical traditions. Turkey, Indonesia, and India are all lands in which Islam played an important role. During that time, there were 4 main locations that contributed to my overall education. The conservatory itself, the cafe across the street, also an espresso royale, and the street, and the stage. At the conservatory, I was studying the previously mentioned styles of world music, mainly from the perspective of an ethnomusicologist, and thus gained a good deal of exposure to Islamic history and culture through course readings and concerts. Additionally, this was my first exposure to the writings of Western academics on Islam, as well as my introduction to Sufi poetry and thought. At the cafe, I busied myself with readings of a personal interest, which among other things included the autobiography of Malcolm X, Islam and the Destiny of Man by Charles Le Gaitan, a translation of the Quran from a man who clearly disliked Islam and Muslims, and a book called Islam, 2nd edition, by Fazl Rahman. Additionally, my interest in American race relations and music led me to read about the African roots of jazz and blues and their relationship to Muslim societies in Africa. On the street around the corner from the conservatory, I used to hang out with homeless guys who were out there asking for spare change, just as a way to get to learn about the plight of people who lived a life very different than mine. And I also ended up hanging out with a security guard who stood in front of the bank there, and his job was to keep all those other homeless, the homeless people away from it and keep them from spare changing in front of his bank. This guy happened to be a 5%er, and the 5%ers are a strange and fascinating offshoot of the Nation of Islam, which is a heterodox sect that was founded in the early to mid-20th century in the United States. Finally, on the stage, that is performing with various musicians and jazz, funk, and hip-hop groups around Boston and the Northeast, I had more interaction with Muslims of various persuasions. From the 1960s onward, many jazz musicians converted to various sects of Islam: Sunni, Ahmadiyya, Nation of Islam. Similarly, in the 1980s and onwards, many hip-hop musicians converted to various sects of Islam. And the liner notes on their albums and in the hip-hop realm, the lyrics of these albums as well, often contain statements about their Islamic beliefs. So in these four environments, I was exposed to a number of perspectives on Islam: modernist, perennialist, Nation of Islam, 5%er, 19th century Orientalists, 20th century academics, ethnomusicologists, whirling dervishes, all different types of Sufis, you name it. So what had started as a musical and philosophical interest had slowly evolved into a more determined area of research. After several years of performing and touring the college and nightclub circuits in the Northeast, it became clear that I might be headed for a career change when I was sitting in my band's tour bus reading about 19th century Egyptian jurists debating the fine points of legal methodology as we traveled to some college to open up for Run DMC or the likes. So I'll end here the VH1 behind the music portion of my talk and fast forward to the more recent past. So after retiring from this gig circuit and spending several years doing coursework and independent research, I find myself still digging deeply into the same topics that had originally started this search for me. And that very simple question: what is Islam and what do the Muslims believe? So many of the previously mentioned authors and books that I had mentioned, that I've been reading and reflect, many of the books that I had previously mentioned reflected various different trends in English language works on Islam. There's what I'll just loosely call the modernist reformist perspective. And these are general terms which need a lot more unpacking, but that's going to be in the dissertation. So we'll move on we'll just stick to these terms for now. So an example is the Pakistani author Fazl Rahman, who, though writing from a Sunni background, rejected much of the traditional interpretation and scholarship that had been the mainstream prior to the colonial incursions, especially in the 19th century. Additionally, there were authors who were inspired by certain Western feminist ideals, such as Fatima Mernissi, who sought to redefine the traditional Islamic interpretations of female dress codes, social roles, and social roles according to Western ideals. Then there were the perennialists, such as Charles Le Gaitan, Said Hussein Nasr, Frithjof Schumann, Martin Lings, and others, who wrote from within Islam, but from a perspective that grew out of a 20th century, or grew largely out of a 20th century European philosophical tradition that counted among its premises the unity of all world religions, i.e. there being multiple paths to the same truth, and the notion that pre-modern societies were somehow superior to the post-Christian West, which had just seen 2 gruesome world wars and was undergoing a huge social and spiritual upheaval. Another strain of writings that became more and more available throughout the 1980s and 90s is that of the Salafi or Wahhabi ideology. Wahhabi is often a touchy term for people who come from areas where it's taught commonly, like in Saudi Arabia, etc. So I'm referring to it as Salafi Wahhabi to be a little bit politically correct here. So that is to say, works which were often translations of earlier works by key figures in the movement, such as Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the 18th century ideological founder of the Wahhabi movement in present-day Saudi Arabia, or Ibn Taymiyyah, the 13th century Hanbali scholar, from whom Ibn Abdul Wahhab drew many of his ideas. There were also a number of works by modern writers, often converts to the Salafi Wahhabi version of Islam, who wrote broad claims, works that had sort of broad claims claiming to define true Islam, all others being somehow false. Furthermore, there were several writers who wrote about Sufism, that is, Islamic mysticism, but they were writing from a perspective that it was possible to speak of Sufism without any connection or much connection to the actual Islamic tradition from which it had sprung. Examples include Hazrat Inayat Khan and others. And finally, another important trend in many of the works in the English language was what can loosely be called Orientalist writing, that is, Western authors who had studied Islam and the Muslims from a perspective that was often, though certainly not always, informed by certain cultural or personal biases or political motives, which willingly or unwillingly would skew the perspective of the subject at hand. And although I learned a great deal from all these authors and their works, I nonetheless became certain that they were, in varying degrees,